Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on something I think we've all experienced in some way: culture clash.
Hmm.
We want to get under the skin of what it really means, what sets it off, and look at some actual examples.
And we've got a couple of interesting sources for this.
We do. We're looking at the website for Culture Clash Records, record store chain, funnily enough, and also an article from Study Smarter, which is an online learning platform called Culture Clash: Definition and Examples.
Right. So the goal is really to understand how these, well, cultural differences can lead to those awkward moments, those misunderstandings, and maybe what we can actually learn from them.
Exactly. And that record store name, Culture Clash Records, it's quite evocative, isn't it?
It really is. And when you look at their site, you see they have locations in different states, tons of different music genres,
Yeah.
and especially this big world music section. It's broken down by region, by country. It kind of immediately shows you the sheer variety of cultural expression out there.
And I suppose the potential for those expressions to bump up against each other, hence the name maybe.
Precisely. It hints at both the richness and, yeah, the potential friction. Sets the stage nicely for what the Study Smarter article explores.
Definitely. So think about a time, and maybe you've felt this, connecting with someone from a different background.
Oh, sure.
Maybe just a slight disconnect, you weren't quite on the same page, or felt like your perspectives were just different.
Yeah, those moments happen.
Well, a lot of that can often boil down to this idea of culture clash. So let's unpack it. What exactly is culture clash, according to Study Smarter?
Okay, so they define it pretty clearly. It's about those conflicts or misunderstandings that pop up when people or groups from different cultural backgrounds interact.
Conflicts or misunderstandings. Okay.
And it's not just surface stuff.
Mm.
It highlights real contrasts in core values, beliefs, everyday practices, how people see the world, essentially.
Right. And Study Smarter points out how significant this is now, especially in multicultural societies and with globalization.
Absolutely. It's everywhere. And these clashes, they can lead to resistance, people digging their heels in,
Yeah.
or adaptation, finding ways to bridge the gap.
It really impacts how we communicate, how we build relationships.
Definitely. And Study Smarter stresses that understanding it is crucial for developing cultural sensitivity and ultimately better cooperation.
So it's more than just disagreeing about, I don't know, music, taste, or food. It goes deeper.
Much deeper. It touches on fundamental aspects of identity and social interaction.
Okay, so how do these differences actually show up? How do they manifest in real interactions? Study Smarter talks about this, right?
Yeah, they do. They talk about various cultural factors. Language, obviously, is a huge one.
Sure.
But also traditions, think holidays, rituals, social customs. Then there are values, what a culture prioritizes, and just everyday behaviors. All these things shape our perspective.
And the more different those perspectives are.
The higher the potential for misunderstanding or even conflict. It makes sense, you know?
Yeah, it does. And Study Smarter has a really good concrete example for this: eye contact.
Ah, yes, that's a classic.
In many Western cultures, looking someone in the eye generally signals confidence, honesty, engagement.
Right, you're paying attention.
But as they point out, in some Asian cultures, especially maybe with elders or people in authority, direct eye contact can actually be seen as disrespectful.
Exactly. Such a small thing, nonverbal, but with totally different interpretations. It can lead to completely wrong assumptions about someone's character or intentions.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, how ingrained these things are.
It does. And when different cultures meet, people often initially fall back on their own norms. It's natural. It's what feels comfortable.
But that's where the friction can happen.
That's often the flashpoint. Yeah. Study Smarter really emphasizes how important it is to find strategies to sort of manage these differences for a more harmonious environment, whether that's work, school, wherever.
And they even suggest something practical, like learning basic phrases in other languages.
Yeah, just a few words. Hello, thank you.
It seems small, but it can signal respect, break down a barrier instantly.
Definitely shows effort and awareness.
Okay, so we understand what it is, how it can look. Let's dig into the causes now. What actually triggers these clashes, according to Study Smarter?
Well, the first one they list is, perhaps unsurprisingly, language barriers.
Right. If you can't communicate clearly.
Exactly. Misunderstandings happen, frustration builds. It's almost inevitable. They suggest things like using clear, simple language, maybe visual aids, gestures.
Aims to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and they give that example of a manager's instructions not being fully grasped by an employee because of language.
Yo, I can easily see that happening, leading to errors. inefficiency.
Yeah, real practical consequences. And again, it reinforces the value of even trying a few basic phrases in the other person's language.
Okay, language barriers, what else?
Contrasting norms and values. This is a big one.
Okay, explain that a bit.
Well, every culture has its own set of often unspoken rules about what's appropriate. Think dress codes, maybe religious practices, social behaviors like punctuality or personal space.
Things we take for granted in our own context.
Exactly. And what's perfectly normal in one place might be considered rude or strange in another. It's crucial to respect and try to understand these differences, especially if you want inclusive environments.
And Study Smarter connects these norms and values to deeper roots, right?
Yeah, they mentioned that these often stem from a culture's history, its social development, even economic factors. They don't just appear randomly.
So having that awareness can foster tolerance.
Definitely. And they also mentioned intercultural dialogue, basically, just talking and sharing perspectives as a way to bridge these differences.
Makes sense. Talking helps. What's next on the list of causes?
Nonverbal communication. We touched on eye contact.
Right.
But it also includes gestures, facial expressions, body language. These can vary wildly.
The classic thumbs up example. Good in some places. Yeah.
And quite offensive in others. Yeah. So being aware and adapting your nonverbal signals is pretty important to avoid misinterpretation.
Okay. And the last cause they mention.
Different decision-making processes. This one's interesting, especially in group settings.
How so?
Some cultures really prioritize collective agreement, building consensus. It might take longer, but everyone feels heard.
Okay, group focus.
Others might lean more towards individual responsibility, maybe quicker judgments made by a leader or expert.
More individualistic.
Right. And when you put those two approaches together in, say, an international business team.
You can see potential for tension. Different expectations about how collaboration should work.
Precisely. Different ideas about leadership and process.
Which seems like it leads naturally into the impact of globalization.
It does. Study Smarter points out that globalization has just, well, increased the frequency and complexity of these kinds of cultural interactions.
We're bumping into each other more often.
Yeah, diverse societies are interacting more closely than ever before, which, offers amazing opportunities for cultural exchange and learning. That also inevitably increases the potential for these culture clashes to occur.
Okay, so we've got the definition, manifestations, causes, the role of globalization. Let's look at some more specific examples from the Study Smarter article. Where do these clashes often play out?
The workplace is a big one, especially multinational corporations.
Makes sense. Lots of different backgrounds coming together.
Exactly. And Study Smarter notes that while this diversity is a huge asset, brings different perspectives, boosts creativity.
There's a but?
There's a but. If those differences aren't understood or respected, it can definitely lead to clashes.
Do they give an example?
Yeah, good one. An American manager with a very open-door policy encourages everyone to speak up, share concerns directly.
Okay, seems pretty standard in some places.
Right. But now imagine an employee from a culture with a much stricter hierarchy.
Where you perhaps wouldn't approach the boss so directly.
Exactly. It might feel uncomfortable, inappropriate, maybe even disrespectful to the manager's position. So that difference in expectations about communication and hierarchy can cause real issues.
Yeah, I can see that. So it requires more than just saying we value diversity.
Much more. Study Smarter calls it developing cultural competence.
Which involve?
Things like empathy, trying to see it from the other side, open-mindedness, and really strong, adaptable communication skills. They also mention intercultural training programs as being potentially helpful.
Okay, workplace diversity. What's another example area?
Cultural norms in communication itself. We talked about direct versus indirect styles.
Right. Some cultures are very explicit, others more subtle.
Yeah. Say what you mean versus relying on context and hints. Internationally, this can easily cause confusion. Someone from a direct culture might seem blunt or rude to someone from an indirect one.
And someone from an indirect culture might seem evasive or unclear to someone from a direct one.
Exactly. Study Smarter suggests just being observant, noticing these differences, and trying to adapt your style can really help bridge that gap. Maybe reading between the lines a bit more or being more explicit, depending on the situation.
Okay. What about education?
Yes, the educational environment. Students bring different cultural backgrounds, which often means different expectations about learning.
Like how?
Well, some educational systems might really value memorization, getting the facts down perfectly. Others might prioritize critical thinking, debate, challenging ideas.
Different skills being emphasized.
Totally. And they use the example of a student accustomed to group work, lots of collaboration,
Yeah.
suddenly finding themselves in a system that's highly individualistic, focused on individual tests and assignments.
That could feel really isolating, couldn't it? A real clash with how they're used to learning and contributing.
Definitely. They frame it like culture A prioritizing teamwork, culture B prioritizing individual assessment. That shift can be tough.
Makes sense. Any other key examples?
The last one they mention is probably the most familiar to many people: international travel and tourism.
Ah, yes. Going abroad.
When you travel, you inevitably encounter unfamiliar customs, languages, social norms. It can be confusing, sometimes uncomfortable.
The fish out of water feeling.
Exactly. And Study Smarter points out that simply understanding a bit about local etiquette, how people greet each other, tipping customs, what's considered polite, can make a huge difference.
Avoids awkward moments, maybe even prevents giving offense unintentionally.
Precisely. They even define cultural etiquette, simply add the customary code of polite behavior in a society. Knowing a bit of it goes a long way.
Okay, so those are some really good, tangible examples. Thinking more broadly, what are some of the deeper educational insights Study Smarter pulls out about culture clash?
Well, they stress it's not just about simple disagreements. It often involves these deeper challenges stemming from fundamentally different cultural beliefs and practices.
Going beyond the surface level.
Right. To really get it, you need to consider the traditions, the language, the societal norms that are kind of baked into a culture and contribute to friction when cultures interact. It's about understanding those roots.
And they identify key factors that contribute.
Yes, things like differences in everyday practices or rituals, varied communication styles, and etiquette, how we interact politely, and crucially, those contrasting values or moral codes about what's right and wrong.
And these can easily lead to conflict.
Very easily. Especially if our view is clouded by preconceived notions or stereotypes about the other group, we might misinterpret actions based on our own cultural lens.
Do they have an example for this deeper level?
They brought out the multicultural team decision-making idea.
Okay.
If part of the team values consensus and the other values quicker, perhaps more individualistic decisions.
Yeah.
Those clashing expectations about collaboration and leadership can create serious tension. Unless, as they wisely add, the team has strategies for clear communication and finding compromises.
So it's not just about individual interactions, but also about systems like team dynamics or even...
Organizational culture, yeah.
Right.
Study Smarter talks about that too. How employees interact, how decisions get made, how hierarchy is viewed within a company.
And when different organizational cultures merge.
That can be a real challenge. Maybe productivity dips while people figure out new ways of working together, negotiating new norms. The key takeaway seems to be fostering openness to different perspectives to lessen those negative impacts.
Which leads nicely into the whole idea of understanding cultural differences, not just identifying them.
Absolutely fundamental. Recognizing and respecting differences is key, not just to manage diversity, but maybe even to leverage it.
Leverage it how?
Well, different backgrounds bring different ways of thinking, different approaches to solving problems. That variety can actually be really beneficial, lead to more creative solutions, richer interactions.
If managed well.
If managed well. And they suggest strategies for building that understanding. Active listening is a big one. Really trying to grasp the other person's viewpoint, showing empathy. Cultural exchange programs can offer valuable firsthand experience and just continuous education on cultural sensitivity.
And they define cultural sensitivity too, don't they?
They do. Basically, being aware of and respecting others' cultural practices and beliefs so you avoid causing offense unintentionally.
It's about awareness and respect.
Exactly. And they use a classroom example again. Students from different backgrounds might participate differently.
Right. Some might speak up more readily than others.
Yeah, and it might not be about interest level, but about cultural norms around student-teacher interaction or expressing opinions. Recognizing that allows educators to create more inclusive methods that work for everyone.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's bring it back to where we started Culture Clash Records.
Yeah, that name.
It's interesting, isn't it, that a business would choose that name? It suggests, like you said earlier, an awareness, maybe even a sort of embrace of cultural diversity through music.
I think so.
Yeah.
And the way they organize their music, especially that detailed world section by region and country, shows a real effort to present these diverse cultural forms.
But the name itself, Culture Clash, it still carries that hint of potential friction, doesn't it?
It does. It subtly acknowledges that when different traditions or sounds meet, it might not always be smooth. There can be misunderstanding, maybe even initial resistance. It's like they're saying, here's all this variety, explore it, but be aware things might sound different, maybe challenging.
Yeah. Like browsing those sections, you might find something totally unfamiliar.
Mhm.
And that act of encountering the unfamiliar, deciding whether to engage with it, how to interpret it, that's kind of a mini culture clash experience right there, isn't it?
That's a great way to put it. It's a microcosm of navigating cultural differences more broadly. There's potential for discovery, for appreciation, but also maybe for confusion or judgment if we're not open.
It makes you think about our own reactions to unfamiliar culture, whether it's music or something else.
Do we approach it with curiosity? Or do we filter it through our own norms? The fact the store exists and celebrates this diversity suggests a positive framing of space where clashes can lead to appreciation.
Right. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, let's quickly hit the key takeaways from Study Smarter again.
Sure. So first, the definition. Culture clash is about those conflicts or misunderstandings that happen because of different cultural backgrounds.
Got it.
Then, understanding the differences, language, traditions, values, how they shape perspectives, and can sometimes lead to conflict.
We had examples like eye contact norms, different ways of making decisions.
Exactly. And the causes.
Yeah.
Language barriers, those contrasting norms and values, different nonverbal cues, and those varying decision-making styles.
And the educational insights, how it impacts communication, relationships, the deeper challenges from differing beliefs, and the real need for communication and compromise.
Yeah, analyzing the meaning involves getting at those differing beliefs and practices and finding strategies to connect effectively.
Okay, that covers the core idea as well.
So maybe a final thought for you to consider. Thinking about Culture Clash records, all that diverse music, and everything we've discussed about Culture Clash,
Yeah.
how does cultural exchange, which is so enriching, sometimes lead to unexpected interpretations, maybe even offense, even with something like music, which feels universal, but isn't always received the same way everywhere?
Hmm, that's interesting.
What responsibility do we have, as people who consume culture, but also maybe create it, to navigate these potential clashes with sensitivity, with a real willingness to understand where someone else is coming from?
That's a good question. It suggests a more active role for us.
Maybe. Perhaps the next time you encounter something culturally unfamiliar, a piece of music, a social custom, anything you'll approach it with, maybe a deeper awareness of these complex dynamics, an awareness of the clash, but also the huge potential for connection and mutual understanding that sits right alongside it.